So I'm Aldrich. I work for Elastic as a developer advocate. And what I'm going to talk about here is actually set up perfectly just a second ago talking about mental health. I'm going to talk a little bit about open sourcing mental illness as well, some of the work they've done. I'm actually part of that organization as a speaker for them. And so if you're looking for speakers to talk about mental health at your office, at your event, they always maintain a running list of folks available to talk about different things. They're a great group to get in touch with. That was my pitch for my next slide, but we'll go back to this one now. So we're going to do a little bit of yak shaving here. And folks have heard of the term yak shaving before. One person's heard of yak shaving, so we'll talk about yak shaving. So the concept of it, I found out there's it's grown to have both a positive and negative connotation, but in the original intent of yak shaving was mostly positive. It refers to all those little bits of work you have to do before you can actually work on the problem, right? So before you can deploy a Kubernetes, you gotta make sure all your infrastructure's in order, and then we gotta make sure we've actually got the authority to do the work and make sure the business has the buy-in. All that is the yak shaving for actually building the software that you wanna do. And so for a lot of ways, mental health is sort of the key thing we ever yak shave on, right? If we're gonna do anything at all, we need to make sure our mental health is in order. So that's sort of the metaphor here, but anyway, that's a Highland cow and not a yak, so it doesn't matter. Cool, so yeah, I want to talk about these two organizations real quick. So I talked briefly about open sourcing mental illness. Jeremy talked about it as well, and Elastic is awesome because they let me come out here and talk about mental health instead of trying to pitch you on observability and why you should use Elastic. But you should, I can talk about that later. But I'm not talking about that here. And so that's pretty cool, they let me come out and do that. The most important part of any mental health talk is the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional. I cannot diagnose or recommend treatment for any mental health diseases. These are my experiences, my personal experiences. This is what I've gone through, what's helped me. It might be useful for you, I hope it is, but it's not a diagnosis, it's not a treatment. I cannot approve anything for you or prescribe anything. I'm also gonna talk about my experiences with depression, anxiety, and ADHD. It doesn't go particularly dark or particularly deep, but if it's something that's close to what you experience, or if it's triggering for you in some way, feel free to step out. I am not offended. Take care of yourself first, please. So when I first gave this talk I guess not the first time I gave it, when I gave it in Portland last year, it happened to be National Suicide Prevention Month. It was September. It's called that because mental illness can be fatal. Depression is potentially a deadly disease. It's important to know that and think of it that way. That's what it is. It affects a lot of people. And so consequently, there's helplines, right? There are organizations out there dedicated to making sure people don't die of depression, right? If you are struggling with any of these, call this number. Someone is there to talk to you. If you don't want to talk to someone because talking is just too much right now, text connect to 741-741. You can text to somebody. They're there to listen to you. So please, know these things, take pictures of the slide, send it out to everyone you know. Everyone should have these phone numbers available. Crisis happens when you least expect it. All right, all that heavy stuff's out of the way. We're gonna get more. Cool, so I'm gonna talk about ADHD. This is my personal issue. This is what I deal with mainly for mental health concerns. I thought this was a sufficiently distracting picture to try and depict it. It always gets me to stare at it about halfway through because I forget which images cycle. But it's not entirely like that. This is sort of the picture everyone has in their head when they think ADHD. There's all these things going on. It's the hyperactive kid bouncing around the room who can't focus on one thing. It's sort of like, oh, look, shiny over there. Look, someone in a bright jacket. Look, a squirrel. And it can be, but it's not the core of what ADHD is. That's just sort of the stigma that comes up. There's a lot more to it. Like all mental health issues, it's largely a chemical imbalance. In the case of ADHD, it's dopamine. This is the chemical that's not properly balanced in the brain of someone who has ADHD. Dopamine is responsible for working memory. It's responsible for being able to hold all those bits in your brain as you're trying to figure things out. So poor working memory is largely the consequence of low dopamine. So how does that affect us primarily? So the main function of our brains that gets affected is executive function. The issue with ADHD isn't necessarily that we're bouncing around and can't focus. It's that the executive function portion of our brains, that frontal lobe that helps us make rational decisions, is not working correctly. It is underdeveloped. So what does our executive function control? Wandering attention. Now, this sounds like a bad thing. Your attention's wandering all over, but there's actually a part of your brain that is sort of paying attention to all of the little inputs that you're not focused on. Listening to all the background noises, paying attention to what's happening in your periphery, all those little sensations you're not paying attention to at the moment. For most people, it filters out what's not important. You're focusing on a task, it's not important that something's happening in the background. Right? It's not important that someone's chattering out in the hallway, you're having a conversation with someone next to you. For someone with ADHD, all of those things become very important and interesting all of the time. So like if I'm in a crowded room having a conversation with someone here, it's very hard for me to filter out all the conversations around me. Really useful, say, hunter-gatherer out in the woods, like paying attention to all the background noises that might be trying to eat you. Less useful in an office. There are fewer lions in Red Venture's office than you might expect. Impulse control, right? This is the obvious one. Executive function's that thing where you're like, that would be real fun. Wait a minute, I could hurt myself. Impulse control doesn't always work with folks that have ADHD. That's where the hyperactivity usually comes from. A kid's like, it'd be awesome running around. I'm going to do it right now. Not thinking through the consequences or what else that affects. Also affects emotional regulation. This is sort of a part of you that can catch emotional reactions and pause them, or regulate them and say, hey, this is not such a big deal. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. Folks with ADHD tend to experience emotions suddenly and very binary form. It's not like I'm a little sad. It's like all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed, or all of a sudden I'm very angry about something, and it's not really that important. That can happen a lot with folks that have ADHD, and that can be problematic, right? You have a small mishap at work, and then you're like real pissed off at somebody for no reason. Doesn't always treat relationships well. Executive function also helps you keep track of time. So a lot of folks with ADHD, definitely myself included, have what we'll refer to as time blindness. I'm pretty good at knowing when things are now. I'm pretty good at knowing when things are not now, including what's happening later and what happened before, but not so good at like how long is 5 minutes or how long is half an hour for my talk. This is funny because it's like a bit at this point because I've done it every time I've done this. But every time I go to do this talk, I usually mean to turn on a stopwatch so I know how long I've been talking because of this problem, and I always forget. And here we go. Okay, now I know how much time is passing. It also controls things like task switching and hyperfocus, right? Hyperfocus is a term in ADHD about sort of that tunnel vision focus on a single task. It sounds really interesting because for programmers, we talk about flow a lot, right? Like getting into flow and being able to do that, like time disappears, you forget to eat, you forget to take care of things, you miss meetings because you're so focused on one task. It would be great if I could control and choose to focus that on my work. What happens is I don't get to choose when that happens. Every once in a while, it's like, I go to book a plane ticket to come here, and suddenly I'm down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, and it takes me 2 hours to actually get through booking my plane ticket. On the upside, I do know how sewing machines work now. If you want to know how that functions, I can tell you. It's not a running stitch, it's a lock stitch. That's how it stays in place, and how I can use thread on both sides. Anyway. I did eventually get planes booked. I'm here, but it took a couple hours, and I had to keep refreshing because it timed out. It was no fun. And then task switching is expensive, right? So what might be someone saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It takes me a lot of effort to switch from one task to another. There's a lot of downtime in between as I cycle. So multitasking sucks. This is a large coping mechanism. I saw this tweet the other day, and this largely describes my entire educational career. Is coping through use of adrenaline. I'm not sure how visible that is for everyone in the back row. All these are pretty high contrast. The gist is exactly that, right? I get a project from school. I avoid starting it because it's kind of a pain in the butt and I don't really want to do it. As the deadline grows, suddenly you start to panic and realize, I might not actually be able to get this done. Oh no, that's due today. I've done nothing. It's a Brian Regan bit. I had 3 months to work on it. I did nothing. It's due today. So you finally start your project. You get stuck on one detail if I can just get the title to look right, it won't look right. What's the correct theme? Maybe I need to edit the master slide some more. Is this really where I want that? What font do I want to use on this page? Right? That's something you can get stuck on in hyperfocus. Not super useful for completing your report paper. Really good for the title page looking nice. Not great for the actual grade at the end. You can rabbit hole down these. You freak out about all that wasted time. You spent 2 hours, you've got 1 paragraph written. You're going to keep panicking, stay up as long as it takes. Make sure it's perfect. You pull it off. You probably did pretty good because you spent this whole time obsessing over the perfection of your paper that you wrote a rough draft and 3 revisions of in one night. And you deliver it, and you're exhausted. You burn out. And then do it again the next time. And every other time you get it too. The same person that made this tweet also does a bunch of illustrations about what it's like with ADHD versus someone who's neurotypical. And largely, this is what it looks like, starting the task. For someone who has ADHD, the amount of steps, the distance we have to climb is totally the same. But that getting started point is significantly higher for someone who has ADHD than someone who doesn't. And these are a lot of the messages that we sort of internalize when we struggle with that getting started. This is what we hear. How come you can't do it? Everyone else is doing it fine. What's wrong with you? So another way I've heard this described is called the wall of awful. This was a great description of it. Jessica McCabe has a YouTube channel called How to ADHD, where she had 2 videos about this. I linked them in my resources for this slide. I'll upload it after this talk and have it up by the end of the day. The wall of awful is something everyone experiences, right? This is when you have a task that you struggle with starting for whatever reason. And maybe it's something as simple as like, I've got to pay my past due medical bills. But you already missed them. You're already late. You already feel that judgment of everyone who's like, how come you couldn't just pay it on time? What's wrong with you? You can't get your finances in order? Are you just lazy? And every time you fail that task, it builds more bricks in that wall. So the difference between anyone else and someone with ADHD is folks with ADHD tend to build these walls higher, and they tend to build more of them. Because for anyone else, it might be like, I just missed it. That sucks, brick. I'm going to go pay it now. For someone with ADHD, it's like, I missed it. Who am I disappointing? That's yet another problem I've had. I'm so lazy. Maybe I disappointed someone else and they're angry at me. That's 2 more bricks. And now I feel shame about that. And I feel shame about the shame. And it reminds me of another time when I was younger and that happened. And you just start building this wall around this task of just paying your water bill. There's a few ways to deal with the wall of awful. We have to deal with it at some point. Otherwise, we get nothing done. And I at least got up here on stage, so I've accomplished something. The 3 ways we tend to react to it in the way that feels natural to us. We can stare at it. Here's a wall. You can try and go around it. You can try to sort of run away from your problems. This often looks like rabbit holing down unrelated tasks. The problem with the wall of awful is it's metaphorical and infinitely wide, so you're never going to get around it. The third thing you can do is eventually get so worked up you Hulk smash your way through it, right? Overcome by emotions, smash through the wall, accomplish the task, everything's happy. The problem with these 3 things is that 2 of them don't work, and 1 of them's unhealthy. So staring at a wall won't make it go away. Running around infinitely wide, infinitely tall, metaphorical objects never helped anybody. And Hulk smashing is just going to lead to burnout every single time you have this task. It is stressful. If you think about these 3 responses, they refer to our 3 innate reactions to stress, right? They are the freeze, fight, and flight responses. Staring at the wall is freezing up. You're just sitting there staring at it, trying to run away from it, going around it, and eventually getting to the point where you burst your way through it. And part of that unhealthiness of burst your way through is not just the trauma that you experience, but that can bleed out to other parts of your life. What if it's doing the dishes? For whatever reason, you just can't get to that point, and it builds up until your roommate's confronting you about it, and you're getting pissed off because you're internalizing all that, and you know you should be able to do it, and you're taking out all of that emotion on them, and that's not great either. It affects your life outside of just your internal mental health. So there are ways to deal with it. This is sort of part 2 of the video series. How do we actually get through this? How do we deal with it? Well, the first thing is you can build a door. So these are sort of shortcuts that can trick you into approaching the wall a different way. So this is like, I have a hard time maybe writing a paper at home, and I've also got lots of ways to distract me and help me run around this wall. But maybe if I go to the library and just have my laptop and one screen and just that one thing, I can focus on that task. I'm changing up my environment. Now the problem is this doesn't help you the next time, because you only built a door for that one wall for that one task. The next time you come up to it, the door's not there. You still have to deal with the wall again. The other way is to climb it. You have to do the emotional labor, process everything to get started. It's hard work. For young people, this can look like the kid who takes 20 minutes just to get his math folder out of his backpack to do one sheet of problems, because they have all this emotional work that needs to happen up till that point. And you can't see it. So it's really hard to be supportive and not call this person lazy or just start it. How come? What's wrong with you? Go to bed. You need to get this done. I've been on both sides of this conversation. And the third thing you can do is you can start to build handholds. This is the kind of thing that can help you in the future. But again, it's a lot of purposeful work. This is when you took the time to climb the wall and you finished the task, retrospect. What helped you get there? What tasks can you do again the next time? What process can you follow that can help you get over this wall faster and faster the next time you go through it? So yeah, this is really interesting process that just, when I heard this metaphor, like, blew my mind of all these ways I've approached things, and I know I've done all this without consciously thinking about it, and it's pretty interesting. Okay, so what does all this make me really good at? The nice thing about ADHD is it's not just a problem. Like, we talk about neurodiversity as opposed to mental illness for a reason. I'm broken in weird ways, but I'm just sort of different. What it makes me really good at is on call. I love Pagey. This is Pagey from PagerDuty. I worked in ops for a long time. Interrupt-driven work, firefighting, I'm really good at. When stuff goes wrong, I can see all the components that are there. I can jump through everything, I can see how it's connected, I can rabbit hole, I can hyper-focus on the problem until it is fixed, and I do a really good job. That's awesome. That plays right to my skill set. Again, it's not great to always be firefighting. Like, you don't want to be the ops team that is always handling an incident, but I'm really good at doing it. I can't save you from Pagey, though. He is a little bit scary. This was like a tweet I saw. Pagey is always looking for new friends, and he's just terrifying. But anyway, he's my favorite mascot. Okay. So what does failure look like? I sort of talked about this, right? Failure looks like those long, distant goals. Hey, when you get a chance to work on this, I'm probably not going to do it, by the way. Don't ever tell me when you get the chance. Like, give me a deadline. Anything like that is really hard. Part of it's that time blindness. I can't figure out how to use a month's worth of time for a deadline. I just don't understand how to work with that. I've had to create a lot of artificial barriers, like, okay, I'm going to specifically schedule time to do these things, and half the time that works. So that's really tough. It's tough because now that I do things like this and talk to you, and now that I want to move up in my career, and it means more projects, and it means more long-term planning, and it means more strategy, I have to work on this skill that's a particular weak spot for me. Mental health comes with comorbidity issues, almost always. For ADHD, it looks like depression and anxiety. So for me, I was always a smart kid in high school. So I got by in high school. It wasn't something that got identified then. But what was nice about high school is it creates a lot of rigid structure to your day. You wake up at a certain time, you go get all your classes done, you try and get your homework done in between there, you go home. It creates this very structured, right? It's very obvious what you're supposed to be doing. So when you're kind of like, I don't know what time is, there's a bell to tell you where to go. Oh, okay, I'll go do that now. So when I got to college, I had some problems. I didn't know how really to be challenged. I didn't know how to work on my own. I didn't know how to manage time at all. And so when my schedule went from, well, you have 6 hours a day where you're supposed to be here, plus activities and whatever, to classes sort of happen whatever, and you can show up or not. No one's going to make you. You should probably do the homework sometime. It got really hard. And I started to wonder why I couldn't do it, why I couldn't make this occur. And so this directly affected the identity I'd built as the smart kid that now I can't do it. What happened? I'm failing at this. So yeah, the first time I went to college, I dropped into deep depression, stopped going to classes, stopped talking to anybody. I'm fortunate that my parents are fantastic. I have a fantastic support structure at home. I called them up and said, yeah, I got to leave. This is not good. I can't be here. So I went home. The problem obviously was the school and the people that were there, and I didn't know the right people, and I couldn't connect, so I tried again. Turns out I was wrong because I still didn't have a diagnosis. Second time, deep depression, stayed in my room, didn't talk to anybody, eventually went home. So yeah, I didn't learn that lesson. Eventually I got lucky in that I fell into tech and IT work and interrupt-driven things, and they wanted to pay me money to go work on computers. That was way better than building up loans, which I'm paying off now. Anxiety is part of it too. This is something that when you can, it's very easy to overcommit. Again, I don't know how much time things take. So it's very easy for you to say, yeah, I can totally do that, I can do that, I can do that. And you build up this ball of expectations, and your work in progress column just keeps growing. And that can very easily overwhelm. I mean, this is something that occurred for me. I'll tell a story about this later, but I organize a lot of things. I do a lot of community work. So I'm currently here giving this talk. I'm writing an article for someone at work, and I'm also organizing DevOps Days New York City next week. There's a lot going on. I'm also selling my house. This often happens with me. And so there's moments where you're like, oh shit, everything's happening at once, and anxiety gets triggered. I've learned how to deal with these. Some of it's medication, some of it's behavioral therapy, but it gets there. I think this is a story a lot of us can relate to. I think a lot of us, especially in tech, grow up as the smart kid, or we're praised at work for the cognitive work we do, for our brilliance, for getting it right, for knowing how to do things and accomplishing tasks. And so when there's something that doesn't lend itself to that, when there's something that interrupts our ability to work and do good work, it hurts directly. I know it's prevalent because we've done surveys. So this is prevalence of mental illness in the US and specifically tech workers. So 5% of all people in the United States will experience some form of severe mental illness. That means it's severe enough to take you out of your daily life, right? You have to stay home, you can't go to work, you can't function. That's severe mental illness, 5%. That's according to the National Institute of Mental Health. They did a survey a few years ago. 20%, so 1 in 5 of you in any given industry will experience some form of mental illness in a given year. So OSME, the open sourcing mental illness group, did a survey in 2016 that, as far as we know, is the largest survey on specifically tech workers. And 42%, it's nearly half of people, it's double the national average, identified as experiencing some form of mental illness. The grain of salt there is it is, in fact, a survey saying, tell us about how you feel about mental illness, so it's probably going to self-select people that identify and care deeply and probably have that to begin with, but it's the largest survey we have. That said, they do one every year. There's a 2019 survey that just finished. There's a 2020 survey that's now out. Go to osmihelp.org, find their data section, take the survey, especially and even if you don't have or think you have any mental health issues. The more data, the more we can actually do something about this. So please take those. So as I got into DevOps and working with computers and thinking about all this, a lot of this sort of clicked, right? I understood how these fit together. We work in complex mechanisms. There's lots of different moving parts. They all influence each other. They're all influenced by the outside. We sort of have limited control on these interactions. We operate in a lot of world of uncertainty. There's a lot of sort of trying things and feeling it out and seeing what happens. And as I thought about people, I was like, these are really the same things. Right? We've got all these different moving parts. We all happen to be in this room right now, but we're all connected in different ways. We all have to network somehow, whether it's verbal communication or not. We're all acted on by the outside. There's a great talk by a friend of mine named John Sowers called Hacking Your Emotional API. It's really, really good. You should look it up. I have a link to it at the end. And what he talks about, the metaphor is your emotions are like an API, right? You call them and things happen, and based on your life experiences, the middleware, what the result is, and how you react to a certain situation. The bad news, your emotional API is public. Anyone here can trigger an emotional reaction for you, and there's nothing you can do about it. We're all acted upon in the outside world, whether we like it or not. How many times have you been watching a movie, a show, had a conversation with someone, you just had an emotional reaction you weren't expecting? You're like, wow, I do not know why I reacted that way. I need to go re-examine that. Congratulations, you experienced an incident in your own internal functions. So what can we do? So if this is true, and if we can kind of think of ourselves a little bit like computers, except we're wet on the inside, what can we do to help, right? How can we help? Can we apply some of the same principles? So one of the things I thought of is that word. One of the things I thought of was observability. I left my water down there, and now I can't say words. It's absolutely true, right? So the concept of observability is we want to be able to look at our systems that are generally opaque, right? What happens inside our brains, unless we actually take time to introspect, is largely opaque, right? Just like software doesn't output anything unless you tell it to. So how can we check in on this? And a lot of the metrics I think we can use for ourselves have to do with emotions. Our emotions can tell us a lot about what's going on inside our body, and as we think about those, I think we can learn about a lot of the outside forces acting on us at any given point in time. This image here is delightfully called the Feel Wheel, also a John Sowers creation. But for someone with ADHD, this is a whole heck of a lot of choice when I'm trying to figure out how I'm feeling. I don't like this many options. It sort of overwhelms me because I want to find the perfect one, and that's not great. So I paint with more primary colors. There's a thing I've done called a check-in, right? This is taking a moment, centering yourself, feeling what's happening internally, and then going through these emotions, expressing how you're feeling it. This can be done on your own. You can just sort of think about it. You could do it in a journal. You could sort of think about it and write it down. I've done this in groups. This is super powerful in a group. You get a bunch of people together and check in, like when you first get together. That's an interesting way to start a meeting. But it's amazing and cathartic to have all these people share where they're at that moment. And one of the things you can do is, because we don't want people interrupting, when you identify with what someone's saying, it's just raising your hand. And there's nothing better than being like, I'm scared about this project failing and having half the room raise their hands like, oh, this is awesome. We can all talk about this and be on the same page. That's super powerful. I want to demonstrate that a little bit and show you what it can look like. Yeah, so I'm feeling scared right now. There's just always this adrenaline and nervousness when I get on stage, especially for a talk like this. It's very personal. It's harder to separate myself from this work because it's about me. And so I'm always scared that people are going to hate it and then consequently not like me. But I'm excited because I think this is a really important topic, and I'm excited to be able to talk about mental health in a public forum, and that there's places that want me to talk about this in a public forum. Because the more we talk about this, the better we can get at it. We can actually improve it, and that's really exciting for me. Yeah, I'm feeling tender as well. Like, I love DevOps Days. These are some of my favorite events. I feel connected to a lot of people. I see a lot of people I know at various DevOps Days events, so I always feel a sense of connection at these. Even if I know like one person, I always feel connected to the crowd by the time I leave. So that's what I'm feeling as well. So with that, I'm in. That's how you'd end a check-in, like if you're doing it in a group. So what's next? Error budgets. This sort of blew my mind when I heard about computers. Like, oh, you mean like it breaking can be an okay thing, and we can get on with our day, and that's totally fine? How novel. How much truer of ourselves, right? You don't have to perform 100% perfectly all the time. You can fail, and it's okay. There's no correction needed, just you failed. You screwed it up. You're human. It's okay. But error budgets have more than just that purpose, too. Like, the other side of the error budget is it also creates a point where you need to be concerned. It has failed enough that we are now concerned about that. You need that for yourself, too. It's okay to have a day where you're like, you know what, I need a mental health day. I'm staying in bed. I'm going to do nothing. I just need to recover from this. Totally fine. When it's a week, we should be concerned, right? We need to reach out to someone. We need to dig in. We need to understand what's happening here in order to correct it. So error budgets, super interesting concept to apply to your own life. The other thing I want to dig into is like a blame-aware retrospective. Has anyone heard of blameless retrospectives? Cool, I get to talk about this to everybody. So the concept, you know a retrospective, right? We got the idea of like a sprint retro or a post-mortem. Like, we at least have that concept, right? When something goes wrong and we've gotten to the other side of it, or even if it's just, you know, everything went right, we want to look back, see what went well, like what could we improve, kind of retrospect on that and learn from that situation. So a concept a lot of people talk about is a blameless retrospective. The idea is, if we've had an incident, we don't want to go in there and say, oh yeah, it was Bobby's fault. He screwed it up. Screw Bobby. Get him fired. Done, right? He made the problem. Now that he's gone, that's obviously never going to happen again, because only Bobby could have made that mistake, not any given human on any given day. That's sarcasm, by the way. And there's also no root cause to problems. Like, blame is usually a scapegoat. You don't really want to learn from your incident. You just want to blame someone and be done. That's why blameless comes up. We want to learn. We don't want to worry about root causes. Like, the root cause to every plane crash is gravity exists. So, like, right, we're not looking for a root cause of why I had a mental breakdown. You're probably not going to find it. There's lots of bits. You want to keep digging and just learn from that. That's the goal. So the concept of blame aware is moving this concept of blame out of a sanctioning thing. This person did bad thing and I must stop them from doing it and it's their fault. And thinking of blame as more of an innate human reaction, because it very much is. When something goes wrong, we have this reaction of like, that's what caused it. You did it, right? It just happens. But to be blame aware, we can own that moment, recognize that it's not useful to dwell there, and look for more learning past that. Because blamelessness affects ourselves too, right? You can't, if it's blameless, you can't be like, oh, that was my fault, I just fat-fingered the command, right? That's still accepting blame and scapegoating that problem and not learning from it. Okay, but what happened beyond that? Like, we want to keep learning. So blame aware can be saying, yeah, I screwed that up, right? I made the wrong choice today to do a thing. We're gonna move past that. What can I learn? How can I fix that in the future? What else can I do to improve it? Because the main thing is that your performance is not your value, right? You didn't get hired because you're going to perform 100% correctly 100% of the time. Hopefully you got hired for who you are and what unique things you bring to an organization and your skill set, not because you're 100% perfect. In case it didn't sink in, your performance is not your value. These are different numbers. So the other thing is to manage work in progress. This is something that's hard for me almost every time I end up having to do it, and I have to revisit this process every time. But this is a tweet that I sent out shortly after I organized the first DevOps Days Hartford. And pretty much exactly the day after. And this is exactly what I accomplished. What happened was immediately after this event, the next day I woke up and I learned what feelings of impending doom meant. And I completely had a breakdown. Like, I could not handle the day, did not know what to do with myself, couldn't get out of bed. Because I don't know if it was a combination of adrenaline wearing off and feeling the burden of everything I'd put aside to have this moment now coming back and crashing in. And I couldn't shake that. But when I'd heard of this concept of non-zero days, right? When you're having a day like this where everything feels completely overwhelming and insurmountable, you need to move everything to your backlog. Change your work in progress to 1. What is my minimum viable next task? Well, I'm in bed. The minimum thing I need to do is probably get up, right? That's gonna be step 1. So let's move that from backlog to work in progress. Get out of bed. Cool, did it. Awesome. Success, check that off. Let's move another thing from the backlog. Well, you're out like pretty much all day yesterday. You've been in bed all day today. Should get clean. Let's shower. Great, awesome. Can do that. That's not too hard. And brushing teeth is healthy. You haven't done any of that today. Definitely didn't do it last night. Let's do that. Let's make sure your breath is all right. Brush teeth. Cool. It's now 11:55 p.m. I ran out of time. It took me all day to do those 3 things. But it wasn't 0, right? I accomplished a thing. And that's a major difference in your day than doing nothing, right? I could have stayed, because I didn't start this till like 10:30, right? I could have just spent the next hour and a half in bed and lost the day, but I didn't, and that makes a big difference. But I wouldn't have been able to get there if I didn't give myself permission to move my entire task list off of my to-do into backlog and ignore it. All right, so recapping, so I think I'm running out of time. We are complex systems, just like everybody else. There's lots of moving parts. We can't see them all. We can't even control them all. So everything we do is sort of, maybe this will work. Let's see what happens, right? So get some observability. Do something so that you can retrospect and understand what's happening inside. If you're just trying to guess and check, you're never going to be able to make process, make hypotheses, and move forward. Error budgets, right? Failure can be okay, but we want to know when crisis is a problem. And when it is, even if we hit crisis, it's okay, right? There's never an incident at work where there was an incident in this product, wipe it out, right? No, it's okay, we recovered. We're gonna make it better. We're gonna make it new. We need to give grace for failure as well. Manage your work in progress, right? Make sure you're not taking on more than you can handle in a moment. When you're feeling that moment, give yourself permission to offload things. The point here is continuous improvement. Right? There's never a point where we're done. Like DevOps, right? DevOps doesn't get to a point where all right, we did it. We accomplished DevOps. Hang it up. We have DevOps now. We're done. No more work needed. Same is true of mental health. You're never going to be done on your mental health journey. It is always about continuous improvement. You're not going to achieve a mental health. You will always have to work on this. So that's the main goal we can do here. But we can keep talking about it, and we can do cool things. So yeah, I'm Aldrich. I work community at Elastic. These are places you can contact me. I'm supposed to change that last link, but that's okay. That link will get you there, but if you just do speaking.craze.com, it will get you there as well for my slides. They're not uploaded yet, because I forgot, but I will upload them soon. So that's where you can find me and talk more about this. Here's some resources. So open sourcing mental illness, osmehelp.org. Go there for a bunch of mental health resources in the workplace, especially for tech, as well as the tech survey. Mental health first aid. This is an awesome website. This is sort of like, first aid, right? If I meet someone who's having a physical health crisis, how can I help? First aid. Mental health first aid is exactly that for your mental health. If you've got a friend who makes that call, hey, I'm struggling right now. What do you do? How do you respond to that? Mental health first aid tells you how to do it. It's amazing. Emotional API, check out that website. I actually work with John Sowers. We do a workshop around emotional intelligence as well, but super cool. Check out that website and that talk. The How to ADHD YouTube channel, super cool, and we've got open spaces. So let's make it okay to talk about mental health in a public forum and just make it a normal thing. That's it. Let's make it a normal thing. Happy DevOps Days.